Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first of our revamped Fisdap Tips and Tricks webinars. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that due to the volume of attendees, all lines have been muted. If you have any questions, please send them through the chat feature and we will save some time to address them at the end of the webinar. Today's tips and tricks topic is setting minimums and reporting in conjunction with Appendix G. Our host is Ben Tate. Ben is a solutions consultant and has been with Fisdap since 2015. So without further delay, Ben, I will pass it off to you.
Thanks, Haley, and afternoon to everyone, or good morning to those in the Mountain or Pacific time zones. I'm going to get my screen shared here in just a moment. All right, and hopefully that is coming through now. Looks to be this. So I've gotten logged in here to my account. So primarily today we're going to focus on getting everything set up for Appendix G, and the main place that that's going to happen is actually under the Accounts tab. So before I get into this, I do want to specify one piece of clarification that I've heard some confusion on, and that is the way we have done our new Appendix G is as a separate report from the graduation requirements report. So I know some people have been looking for a goal set for Appendix G, and there technically is one, but it's a separate goal set for this new report itself, as opposed to the goal sets from our graduation requirements report. So to set that effectively new goal set up with the Appendix G, we'll head to the account page and then program info, and then at the bottom of program info is going to be manage my COAMS Appendix G program minimums. So on this page we have broken down each of the four tables into a separate page here where you can set your minimums and go through and do what you need to do. You'll see a red mark in these blank spots if it is below the recommended number from COAMS. So for example, right now, because we have nothing, it's effectively thinking it's 0, so it's showing red. If I were to put in 35 there, it would now turn green because we have met that. We have met their recommendation and gone above. Now, as always with COA with recommendations, they are recommendations, so you are not required to do these numbers, but they may ask you at a site visit, why you chose to do the numbers you did if they are below what they have recommended. The other neat feature about this, before we really dig deep into adding these, is that if you like the COA numbers, if for any of these boxes the COA recommendations are what you want to use, you can actually leave that space blank and it will just automatically use that. You'll notice we have a little mention about that right there. So for actually entering these, again, pretty simple to start with. You can either just click in the box and start typing in. So again, if I'm like 25, it's going to continue to be red. If I do 30, what they have, it'll be the same color, and if I go above, we go to green. So of course I could go through and enter all these and do all that and spend that time. But if you've already used the Excel file that COAMS has provided, we actually have a way that you can upload that and have that work for filling out this information. And I've actually done that, so I'm going to go ahead and click on that option. Now, the window up here that you guys aren't seeing, but essentially it's just the file selecting window that is pretty standard in either PC or Mac. And I am selecting my Excel file, and I've uploaded, and you can now see that it has what's there, and I'm going to now, I hit go again. Undid it on accident, apologies about this. And then I can hit submit Excel file. And once I do that, it's going to take a moment here. And as you can see, it has now filled in all of the numbers here. And on every table, everything that was filled out in the Excel file, it is using. And you'll notice, again, we're seeing across the board where there either is no goal or I've met the COAMS requirement or recommended, it is staying the same color. If it's above the recommended, it's going to that darker green, and if it's below the recommended, it is showing up in red. So that's just a nice visual reminder to you guys when you're setting this up to know if you are at least meeting what COAMS has recommended. As you can see here, it looks like I did miss an option there, so it's just completely blank still, and so showing red. But if I leave those as blank and save, when I run the report, it'll use COAMS's recommended numbers. The other option, once you have gone in and used your Excel file, is, again, you can still change any of these numbers. So let's say for whatever reason we wanted to change intranasal medication administration. I can go ahead and switch that from a 10 to an 8 and then save. So it's not locking in what you've used on the Excel file. It's just a way to ease getting the numbers in if you've already filled out that Excel file. And again, it's just the one that comes from COA, so if you've got that, you can just upload it once it's been filled out. The other major piece about getting set up in Appendix G before you start running the reports is going to be on tables 2 and table 4, as the first column in both of those tables use lab skills. So the lab skills in Fisdap are customizable, and so because of that, we needed a way to allow programs to use their custom skills, but also have them track in Appendix G. So what we have done is we have set it up so you will just indicate for each line item which of your lab skills you would like to give credit. So for example, if you have not edited your lab skills at all, if you're using the default paramedic lab skills, for table 2, most of these will be a pretty much identical match in their name. So for example, obtain a patient history, we'll scroll to the bottom and find obtain a patient history. So presumably that is the skill that we would want to use. We could use any of the skills from our drop down, but again, we want it to be clear for our students, so when they do an obtain a patient history lab skill, they're now going to get credit in the first column of table 2 for obtain a patient history from an alert and oriented patient. Again, same for going down the line. Any of these that you would want to select, you'll just go ahead and enter comprehensive adult, comprehensive pediatric, direct oral tracheal intubation, and so forth. We do still include the airway management symbol, so the lung and star icon. Anytime you see that in the system, just know that that is going to give airway management credit if they have successfully performed that skill. So you'll need to go ahead and enter these in for table 2, and then also for table 4, because again, the first column of table 4 uses lab skills. I will note that at the moment, we do not have defaulted into the paramedic skills the BLS skills from the second half of table 4. So to add those skills in, if you don't already have those, you would go back to the account page, and I'm actually going to open a new tab for this, and then skills tracker settings. And then in the upper right of skills tracker settings are the lab skill settings. And then we would head to paramedic. So then we would just go ahead and select which section we wanted to add to. So for example, we were looking at 1 and 2 rescue or CPR. I would go ahead and select cardiac for that and click on the plus practice item button. And now I've got a new practice item that I can create. So I can do 1 and 2 rescue or CPR adult. If I want to add a skill sheet to it, which we do have the skill sheets, so there we go. It's actually defaulting to it, 1 and 2 rescue or CPR. So now I've got our skill sheet attached. So we do have the skill sheets for those in the list, but we don't have the lab skills themselves, so you guys will need to enter those lab skills if you don't already have them. And then for the skills practice box, if we want to give credit for other reports like the skills report or the graduation requirements report, we can have, say, chest compressions as one of the options that it gives credit for. And then we can set our peer and instructor goals. So again, these are the goals for the lab skill itself, but we can actually have the lab goals mimic what we have in as a goal for the Appendix G. So for example, if we come back to our settings here for 1, 2 rescue or CPR, COAMS recommends 1. We have 10 set up as our current goal. Let's just say we're going with 10. If I wanted to make sure that students have met that goal in the Appendix G, which of course I could just run the Appendix G report, but if I wanted to do it seeing it using the lab skills widget when they're in their lab, if we set their lab goals to be a total of 10 between peer and instructor for this, and they have exceeded that, then we know for sure that they have met their Appendix G goal. So for example, if we say 9 and 1, and I see that they're at 100% for their lab goals, then I know that together that makes the 10 that is required on Appendix G, or that we have chosen to require on Appendix G. So setting up your lab goals in conjunction with what your goals are for column 1 of Table 4 and column 1 of Table 2 can really help translate the lab goals widget with Appendix G, so that you don't need to run Appendix G every time to see how they're doing for that first column in Table 2 and Table 4. The rest of these skills as well, you could just go ahead and fill out where you need in the lab skills. So if for bag mouth technique, you'd probably go to your airway and go ahead and add that in. And again, once they are in, then you can have your students start entering those lab skills and start getting credit for it. You can always come back if you decide for whatever reason you need to change anything with that skill. So if we needed to change the name, we could click it and make a change. If we just wanted to turn it off entirely, we can click hide and it will not show up for the students as an option. We can change the skill sheet. We could remove the skill sheet entirely. And the Appendix G skills with lab are going to be using the lab skill itself. So while the skill sheet is great, it's not actually required. And if you have a lab skill that does not have a skill sheet attached to it, when the students go to enter that lab skill, they still have a window pop up. Instead of being the skill sheet itself, it will just be a window that says who was the evaluator and was it a pass or a fail. So we still know if it'll be peer instructor, and we still know if it's successful or not. It just doesn't have a skill sheet attached to it. And finally, we also want to make sure, again, always good to save. It should be auto-saving anytime you make a change, but it's a good reminder. The other piece that we want to talk about today is the graduation requirements report. And as mentioned, the goal set is separate from, these program minimums are separate from the graduation requirements report itself. So if we go to the graduation requirements report, we'll see the goal sets that you have in your program. This program itself just doesn't have any custom ones, but again, we can add a custom one. And while at the moment we don't have an exact match of goal set from this to Appendix G, again, similar to how we match the goals that we can with the lab goals to Appendix G, we can do the same here on the graduation requirements report. So for example, under the impressions, or rather, let's just talk ages, total ages, we have the various pediatric breakdown, which and again I went away from that page that I shouldn't have with our program minimums here, so I'm just going to pull that back up. So account page, program info, and manage my Appendix G. And so for example, with pediatrics, we have 18 total, or sorry, rather our goal is 15 total and 5 of each of the pediatric breakdown. So if I wanted to make a grad report that matched this, I would come in and say, all right, well, we want I'm an infant, 5 for infant, 5 for newborn, 5 for preschooler, school age, toddler, adolescent. Sorry, my clicking is not as good as I would like it to be. And then again, for pediatric, we would set that to the 15 that we had for our Appendix G. So not everything will be in the current goal set template that we have that is being tracked in Appendix G, but what is there that does match, you can make it set up and match, so that when your students are going through and when they see their widget on their dashboard, they can have a sense of how they're doing. The other thing to note is that the students do have access to the individual report. So we actually have essentially 2 new reports for the Appendix G. One is the group report, which will do your whole program. It will have the averages and the range for Table 1, and it will spit out the Excel file itself. So if we actually, just to show you what that looks like, let's say we ran for all my students here in this program. It's going to take a moment. It actually shouldn't be too long because these students don't have very many skills. And then there you go. It doesn't even display it in the system. It just has an Excel that you can download, and then that will be what you essentially can use for your for COAMs. But the other report is what you and the students themselves will probably be using quite a bit. So the students don't have access to the group report. They will have access to the individual report. And so again, I'm going to run for one of my students, and this will look very blank because again, the student does not have very many skills at all. But there we go. And actually, it looks like the student has no skills. Hurrah. So again, very, very empty here, but the students will be able to run this and see how they're doing on Appendix G specifically. So what we've been recommending for those who have asked is if you want to, you can absolutely continue using both the grad report and Appendix G in conjunction. You can make a goal set that will mimic the Appendix G as at least where those skills line up. But we also have some programs that have chosen to essentially use Appendix G as their graduation requirements report, and that is just fine as well. It's really up to the programs how they want to do their reporting and how they want their students to continue to research into this. So just as a quick overview, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. Getting set up is going to start with the account page, and then program info, and manage my Appendix G. You can set your numbers manually, or you can use the spreadsheet that is provided, the blank spreadsheet provided by COAMS, which can be uploaded here. And even if you do enter it with the upload the attachment, the spreadsheet, you can still make changes to it on each part. Since we do have some more time here as well, sorry, and I should say the last step is also setting your lab skills for tables 2 and 4. Since we do have a little bit of more time before we're going to get into the questions portion, I did want to quickly go over what each of these tables tracks, because again, I know there's been some confusion with that. So first, I will say that on this page, just above here, we have the quick reference guide. This is going to be a very handy guide for anyone who has questions on where each piece of this report tracks. That it's essentially a spreadsheet that shows what every column requires and what every row requires, so you can know exactly what your students need to be entering for them to get credit on each different section of Appendix G. But just to quickly talk about it, Table 1 is going to be using specifically clinical and field experience. So it's live patients in clinical and field, and primarily is tracking either the ages in this first section, or the ages and their impression, which would be pediatric trauma impressions, or geriatric patient with a trauma impression. And then same with the medical for pediatric and geriatric. It's any of the medical impressions with a patient of that age. And again, the rest of these are using primarily impressions or complaints to give their credit. Generally speaking, we do have an impression or a complaint that will match each of these items, and for anywhere it's not an exact match, again, that's where the reference guide is going to tell you exactly which skill, or rather impression or complaint, is required to give that credit. The skills portion at the bottom of Table 1 does in fact use the skills. IV medical administration is any medication that's administered with an IV med route. So that would be IV with blood draw, the IV piggyback. Any of those will count. IM or sub-Q will be intramuscular or subcutaneous med route for medication. So again, some of these skills, so for example, IV, you can enter an actual IV, or it can be a medication with IV as the med route. So with these skills for the med administration, it is using the med route of those options. And then inhaled medication, again, medication with the nebulizer med route, or any of the other inhaled options for the med route. Table 2 is where we get most of the questions about, and understandably, it's the biggest, it has the most separated parts. Column 1 is going to be lab skills. Again, that's why we're setting up which lab skill gives credit for it. So once you've selected which lab skill gives credit for that line item for column 1, that's how they get column 1 credit. It is peer or instructor, so either one will count towards their column 1 goal. Column 2 is going to use a lab patient with any patient type other than human live, and formative scenarios selected. So we have added the option for formative and summative scenario on lab patients, and it defaults to formative. So as long as your students are essentially not changing anything when they add a lab patient for that first option, it will show as formative. And actually, why don't we take a quick moment just to show what that looks like for anyone who hasn't seen it. I'm going to go ahead and go to Skills Tracker, go to a lab shift, and I will add a patient. And so right at the top, we've got formative, again, it defaults, or summative as the other option. So the only time summative will be used is on column 4. So we'll get to that in a moment. So column 2, again, is going to be lab patient, any patient type other than human live, and formative selected, and then the matching skill that goes along with that for each of these cells. Column 3, the green column, is an isolated skill. So this will be either a quick add skill in clinical or field, or a skill on a live patient in lab, clinical, or field that is essentially a patient with just that one skill. So that's the isolated portion of it. So if a student fills out a patient and has just oral tracheal intubation on an adult patient, and it's a live patient, then it will track in this column. And column 4 is a live patient with more than one skill, so not isolated in lab, clinical, or field, or a non-live patient in lab with summative selected. So that's how that will track for column 4. Table 3 is all using scenarios, and we define scenarios as a non-live lab patient. So any patient type other than live in lab will be a scenario. So table 3 is looking at instances where they have entered a lab patient that's not live as a team lead in the first column, or a team member in the second column, and then with the pediatric, adult breakdown, and geriatric breakdown for these. And then finally, table 4, first column is using the lab skills that you link, and column 2 is going to use a scenario. So again, a non-live patient in lab, and summative or formative will count. The only place that the summative or formative is important is on table 2, and unless you're trying to get for column 4, it should always be formative and not summative. So that's, again, a very brief explanation of what each of the tables tracks, but I know there has been confusion, so I wanted to at least give a little bit of touchstone to that. With that, we've got just a few more minutes left, and I will throw it out to any questions to the audience.
Ben, I'm not sure if you can see the questions panel there, but we do have one question that came in from Julie Jordan. She wants to know, do you plan to make the categories on the graduation goals match the categories and complaints on Appendix G?
That is a great question, and unfortunately I did not see that come in, but we are doing that, or we are planning to do that. We're still trying to figure out exactly the best way to not completely change the grad report, essentially because we do have many EMT programs that Appendix G doesn't affect at all, that we still want to keep the grad report, at least a portion of it as it is now. So likely what it will look like is a new template. So you'll make a new goal set with that new template that'll have the categories names that match a bit more closely with Appendix G.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Does anyone else have any questions before we wrap up? Again, you can send them through the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you to ask. All right. Well, with that said, thank you, Ben, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope you are able to join us for the next Tips and Tricks webinars. We have one coming up on August 7th and one on August 21st. To stay up to date on upcoming webinars or to see recordings of previous webinars, you can go to go.fisdap.net/tips and tricks, and that's and spelled out, not the ampersand. Actually, it looks like we got one more question coming in, or a few actually. Ben, do you mind if we address a couple more questions?
Absolutely not. Yeah, go ahead. Go right ahead.
All right, cool. So when students enter skills under a patient in a lab by quick add, oh, sorry, it looks like that one got cut off. Oh, by quick add, does it track all of the skills?
So in a lab shift, we don't technically have quick add the way we have it in clinical and field, where the quick adds in clinical and field are essentially the exact same skills that could be on a patient, that when they enter a PCR, they see those same skills, just not attached to a PCR. We do have the lab practice skills in lab that are similar, again, because it's not attached to a patient, but it's your potentially personally curated list. You could be using our defaults, but the primary, the place that, or rather the only place that lab skills are tracked is going to be on column 1 of table 2 and column 1 of table 4. And again, that's what setting the option in the program minimums is going to do. So normally the skills themselves, the lab skills, will not give credit on anywhere else of any of the other columns in table 2 or any of the other tables, except for, again, column 1 of table 2 and column 1 of table 4. And it will only give credit for the lab skill that is selected for each of those items.
Great. And then we have another one that's asking, the student widget will reflect the changes we make to the Appendix G.
The student widget at the moment tracks either specifically it's basically a live version of the grad report or a live version of the lab practice goals. So right now we do not have a widget for Appendix G. That is something that we've gotten several requests for, and I know is being discussed. The limiting factor in at the moment is that because Appendix G is just very large and has all these different tables, it's going to be a large widget to keep it having live up-to-date data. It's definitely something we know is wanted, and we want to do it as well. We're just trying to figure out the best way to do it. So yes, we want to. So I know it's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but right now it is not reflected. We want it to be. We're just trying to figure out the best way to do that.
Great. So it looks like that's all the questions we've had come in. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. There will be a quick survey after the webinar, so please be sure to let us know your thoughts. And if you do have any questions that weren't addressed during the webinar, you can put them there, and you can also give any suggestions for future tips and tricks topics. So I hope everyone has a great day.